everyone. You're watching Vintage Motocross Q&A, and I'm your host, Joe Abadi. I want to remind you to keep sharing the show, whether you're on Facebook or you're on YouTube. Tomorrow, when you go over to our Vintage Motocross Q&A page, you'll find out who the winner is of this great book by Keith Geisner, Discovering 6 Days. And as always, we'll be giving away a nice sticker sheet just like this, compliments of Vinco.com. My guest tonight, he's been a pharmacist, he's a pilot, he's been a desert racer. He was inducted into the AMA Hall of Fame in 2010, but you probably best know him for his stylish racing gear that he started back in the late 1960s. It's my pleasure to have as my guest tonight, Mr. John Gregory. John, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
John, I mentioned a lot of things about you being a pilot, a desert racer, and in some of my research, I discovered that you wanted to be a pharmacist and that you are from Oklahoma. How does a young man from Oklahoma who wants to be a pharmacist find his way to the coast of California?
My parents were teachers, so that was easy. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. My favorite uncle flew B-25s in World War II, and he was my hero. So I've always loved aviation, but he was, in addition to his flying in the service, he became a pharmacist. And my aunt was the first registered woman pharmacist in Texas. So I had a little bit of a heritage to live up to. So that's why I decided on pharmacy. And I got into pharmacy because of them. And then after that, things started to happen. I bought a dirt bike and something magic happened. So we go from there.
So the dirt bike, and you know what, John? I got to thank the people who pay the bills, and I almost forgot. Motion Pro, Vinco, Preston Petty Products, Racer X, the International Motocross Museum, Full Circle Racing, and of course, ReplicaMotorcycleParts.com. And we'll hear a little bit more from about each one of their products a little bit later on in the show. You are a pharmacist in Oklahoma. You've got a dirt bike. So is it the dirt bike that prompts you to say, I'm loading it up and I'm going to California? That's what happens?
No, I was a pharmacist. I left Oklahoma the day I graduated from, it's called Southwestern State in Oklahoma. I went directly from Oklahoma the day after I graduated to Arizona, where I worked for a month. And then from my next step was California. And at that time, I was really into cars big time.
Okay.
So I just bought a new Corvette, and I ended up, after passing the state board in California, I ended up in a little town called Corona, and I went into it. And I've always loved being outside. And my first motorcycle was a Trail 90, a step-through Trail 90. And the next thing I know, the owner of that shop, his name was Floyd Burke. I think he was like the number 6th or 7th Honda dealer in the country.
Okay.
And he took me to the desert, and the rest is history. I wasn't long after that I bought a 250 Greaves and started racing. And that was about 1965 or so.
Okay. Hey, John, you know what I want to ask you about? And I didn't know until you just mentioned it, the Corvette. I've always had a love for Corvettes. And I want to know what year your car was and what engine it had. What year was that car?
The first one I had, I got when I graduated. It was this Corvette, basically a standard Corvette with a removable top. It was the convertible model.
Okay, so that was in the 60s.
Yeah. So
okay.
my second Corvette had a 427 in it, and it was what do you call them, a hatchback or whatever they called them back in those days.
T-top car, I guess.
Yeah, but it was a fire-breathing monster. I had it a couple or 3 years.
Okay.
And then and by then, my next car after that was an El Camino, so I could put my bike in it and go to desert races. I raced District 37 here in California.
You weren't racing at all back in Oklahoma after the little step through Honda deal, were you?
I never touched a motorcycle before I came to California.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it was the desert racing that or the bike that got you into the desert racing? There must have been someone that introduced you to desert racing, or was it just something that you found on your own?
Well, I mentioned earlier the dealer that I bought my first bike from was in Corona. I lived in
Right.
Corona at the time,
Okay.
and he introduced. I bought the Step Through 90, and I kind of, I just rode trails and stuff with that. But then he took me to the desert one time, and the next thing I know, he had sold me a 250 Greaves.
Okay.
His name was Floyd Burke, by the way. He was a good friend back in the day. I know he's not around now.
Floyd Burke.
Yeah.
You did stay with desert racing for quite some time. I understand you raced the Baja 500 and the Baja 1000. Who were some of your teammates, and how did you finish in those races?
Well, the main thing was just finishing. Some of my teammates, you won't believe it, but Remo Berlizzi, the founder of AXO, was one of the guys I rode with. Have you ever heard of Juha Tiranen?
Yeah, of course.
One, I think it was a 500 we'd entered, and I had one of those Al Baker 500 screaming 650 monsters that would break your leg if you didn't know how to start it.
Yeah.
Remo and I and Juha were going to ride together, and Juha couldn't make it, so I called up John Tomac, and Johnny rode the first half of a 500, and I don't know. I think it was probably only the third or fourth time he'd been on a bike, but he did great. He got the bike to Remo, and Remo had some problems, and then we didn't get to finish that race, so that was one that I didn't finish. But as far as notables, I just had friends like I rode with Ross Turman, Roger Flaming, names like that. And then I being a pharmacist, I had some doctor friends that I rode with once in a while.
Okay. John, you were a district, you said District 38?
37. I was in District 38, but I lived in San Diego, but I liked District 37 better.
Okay.
So I always raced 37, not 30. Occasionally I'd race 38, but not very often.
You were also in a club called the Cactus Cats?
Yes.
Tell me about the Cactus Cats.
Cactus Cats was a local Corona club, and it was started by Floyd Burke and a couple of friends. So it was kind of a neighborhood kind of a thing. The wives, I think, organized it. The serious club I was in was the Jackrabbits. So I was a member of the Jackrabbits for some time.
Okay. And you rode desert for quite a while. But I also understand that there was one race in particular where you almost didn't make it. You had heat stroke.
Yeah, that was the Greenhorn Enduro. I never was an enduro rider, but
okay,
that's when I first started. I had on I think it started somewhere, and I forgot where. It was put on by one of the Pasadena clubs. Oh crap! Anyway, I would add on a full set of black leathers, and good God, I did everything wrong. I just started racing actually, and yeah, it got kind of. I lost about 15 pounds that day.
Did you really?
Lucky to get out of there alive, but I managed.
Hey, John, I want to ask you something. You're looking down at your phone. The camera's beautiful. The sound is perfect, but I can't see your eyes. Do you know where the lens is on that phone? Where you could? Well, it's not your. There, that's a little bit better, John. You see that?
But now I look like a dork.
No, no. You look great. Now,
how's this? How's
John,
my hair?
John, you know what I always say? God made very few perfect heads. The rest he covered with hair.
Yeah, he was right there for sure.
I'm sure this is a question you've received a lot. I know a lot of people do ask this question. Your initials are JG, yet you start a company called JT. We're all familiar with that gear. We've all used it and have loved it for years. There's a more recent picture of some of the talent that you had back then, or throughout your time at JT. But how did the initials JT come up when a guy's initials name are JG? And of course, your former wife, Rita, RG. How'd you come up with JT?
Well, Rita and I went down. We had progressed to the point we had been told that we ought to get a business license. So we went down together to sign up. We stood in line about an hour and filled out the paper. We got to the where you got your license, and we'd filled out everything except the name of the company. And there was this big old fat lady, and she says, "What's the name of your company?" And I said, "Well, I thought we could do that later." And she says, "Think of one now, go to the end of the line, or come back tomorrow." Well, we'd already been in line for about an hour. And our first product we had were socks.
Yeah.
And so we got them in the first batch we got in Tijuana in Mexico. They were soccer socks, basically. And so I said, well, I told Rita, let's just call it TJ Racing. I can't think of anything. And she said, no, that doesn't have the right ring. And so Rita suggested that we just flip the letters and came up with JT. So that's how the company was named, standing in line for a business license.
Now, you sold a lot of those socks and some other minor things out of the trunk of your car, but eventually you did have some people that wanted to distribute your products, and two of them were pretty popular guys, Lars Larson and Torsten Holman. How did your relationship with Lars and Torsten go, and how did you feel about, was it really branching out once they took the reins on the product a little bit?
Well, Lars is in San Diego. He and Torsten started this company along with her name was Brigitte Berlin. There were three people involved. Mm-hmm. And of course, I was wearing Torsten Hallman leathers and everything else that they made at the time when I was racing. And Lars has always been a dear friend. And I asked him one day if, we were just doing mail order in the very beginning. And I asked Lars if he would be interested in distributing the socks for us, and he was. And so that's how that relationship started.
Okay. I want to remind our viewers that Full Circle Racing, one of our sponsors, still has a great special going on. Black wheel sets, 18, 19, and 21, just $775. You could also send your hubs up to Tom McAllister. He will bead blast and powder coat your hubs, send you back a whole new set of wheels, $775 plus shipping and handling. You also had Joel Robert. You sponsored Joel for like $100 a year and all the gear he could use. Is that how it went?
No, it was $100 a year and all the socks he could use.
Oh.
I didn't have any gear at the time. And also we signed a guy by the name of Ollie Pedersen.
Oh.
We signed Ollie for $50 a year and all of the socks he needed.
Did they go through a lot of socks, John?
They didn't. I don't know. It was a good deal for $100. Probably the best one I ever had.
You also got into, I don't know if a lot of people knew it. I didn't remember too much of it, but JT Racing was also selling air filters at the time that you got from Holland. I'm guessing it was from Twin Air, or you had some rugby jerseys from Australia.
Rugby jerseys kind of came along. There was a brand called Buffalo Breath. Do you remember that one?
I do. That was John Rice. I remember John Rice using one of those.
Yeah, and that's what inspired it. I think our jerseys actually came from New Zealand, but anyway. Okay. And yeah, that's how that whole thing. But we started out with jerseys, and our shtick there was we had socks that you could match the jersey with. I supplied the ISDT people with socks one year with matching jerseys. I don't remember all the details, but it was a thing. And then I was all the Swedes that came over in the early days worked for, or some of them worked for Edison Dye there in San Diego, who was the importer for Husqvarna.
Right.
And I met a guy by the name of Claus Nielsen, and another guy that was connected with him was Arnie. I met they were all Swedes, and Kent Erlene with Erlene Shocks. I met Kent, so I made and Torleif Hansen. Oh shoot, who's the guy that works for Honda now, or did work for him? Gunnar Lindstrom.
Gunnar Lindstrom.
All those guys I was very familiar, and they were all my friends there in San Diego. They're the ones that they introduced me to the Twin Air guy, Bob Twin. And we started making our own filter out after Twin discovered he got a little greedy and decided that I wasn't doing good enough job for him. So we just decided to make our own filter. By then I knew how it was done.
I never knew that there was actually someone named Twin, and that's how they came up with the name Twin Air.
Yeah, this Tuin. He was a Dutchman. He was one of, well, Ken Erlene knew about him. He was a good, or not, I don't know if he was a good friend or not, but Garrett Wolsink and I have always been friends. So Garrett helped me out a little bit there too.
Yeah. John, we are going to take a little bit of a break and hear from one of our sponsors. We'll be back with more from John Gregory.
Okay.
Thank Terry Good and the International Motocross Museum for being a sponsor of the show. Be sure to visit their website at internationalmotocrossmuseum.org. Get yourself some nice hats and swag. Support the museum. Some big announcements are coming up about that museum, too, in the very near future. We are back with my guest this evening, John Gregory. So, John, who do you recall being one of the first sponsored riders from JT with your pants, your jersey, and gloves and other things that you had produced at that point? Who were some of the first people that used your gear?
Well, probably the first American well-known was Marty Smith. He was a local San Diego boy, and then, of course, Glover and Tripes. And I never worked with Marty Motes, but Scott Burnworth were a few of the guys that I worked with first.
Right, and early on. So that wasn't until probably 74 or 75 when originally you got started, I guess, around 1968.
Right.
Okay. There's another question that I often wondered, and I've got a picture of it right here. Brock Glover shows up in pink gear at some of the Supercross races that year. Who was in charge of that? And was that something that Brock had decided that he wanted to wear, or was that something your design team did?
Well, the design team didn't consist of much. It was just Rita and I, basically. No, okay. Brock, we made an all pink outfit just for the fun of it, and I think it was one of the LA Coliseum races, and I can't remember the format of the whole thing, but Brock just kicked everybody's butt that night, and he was wearing the standard Yamaha gear that we made at the time, and they had a special race after everything else was over. I don't remember what the makeup of it was, but anyway, Brock wouldn't ride with it that day because I think he was a little afraid that the Japanese people would laugh at him or something. But he felt really good that night, and he wore that pink outfit and made it famous.
You sure did. You sure
Yeah.
did. Now, John, at that point, we had Dirt Bike Magazine, Cycle Guide, of course, Motocross Action. Was that primarily your way of getting the word out there about JT, other than actually going to a race and putting up banners? Because we didn't have internet or any of this that we have right now.
Well, we going to races was a big part of it. You know, early on, I was Rolf Tiblin and I were good friends,
Okay.
and so yeah, it was kind of it was just word of mouth basically. Of course, we advertised with Dirt Bike. That was the first ads. I think we did some of the first full color ads in the industry. We did those, but it was magazines back then. Magazines and the exposure that we got from our riders and racing.
Mm-hmm. Now, originally you bought the socks in Mexico, but
Correct.
where were the jerseys and the gloves, etc.? Where was all that stuff manufactured, John?
It was kind of a international hodgepodge. It kind of came from everywhere. I tried to get a lot of this stuff made in the country, but nobody would talk to us. And all of the the European guys, they had started out small, and so we worked with several different ones. We started out with of course, the nylon leather thing was basically, I don't know if invented is the right word or not, but is the product of his name was Juha Tirinen. He had a company in Finland called Yoko in later years, but he introduced me to an ice hockey company called Koho, and they're the ones that made the first nylon and leather. Of course, jerseys, there's nothing there. That has always been domestic. We never imported jerseys. The gloves were made by Koho, and then eventually we hooked up with Sinisalo, and we had most of our gear after we quit working with Koho was made by Sinisalo. And the
Okay.
whole chronological, and then we ended up going to Korea, and then eventually we ended up making some of and nearly everything. We had a factory in Tijuana. We started with a factory at JT. We had about 30 women that sewed for us. So we kind of were all over the board. And then, of course, we ended up in China and Vietnam, and God, it seemed like everywhere.
Here's a picture of your team early on. I recognize you and I recognize Rita. Who are some of the other people in this picture, John?
Well, you don't recognize me because I'm not there, but
I'm sorry, it's not you. I know.
Those are all employees that we had.
Right.
we had some good looking young ladies that worked for us. Rita is the one on the far left.
Yes.
And then the guy on the far right, his name was Doug Mello. He became one of the most famous personalities in the world. Doug was in nearly every ad we ever did. The gentleman down kneeling was let's see, Kenny, and then that was Eric Berg. He was my warehouse manager for years, and I forgot the young lady's name.
Okay. You had a rider in your stable. He was a great guy, very flamboyant, sometimes controversial, but he made these pants very famous. Ron Lachine. Who came up with this design, John?
Well, I did. Ronnie, I've known Ronnie before he was born. I bought my first Husqvarna from his dad. He had Honda Lemon Grove in El Cajon.
Right.
And, Ronnie always kind of liked dogs, and people were calling him the Dogger.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd come up with something there. And so I think one of the first ads we did, we had a bunch of Dalmatian puppies. And Ronnie loved dogs, so it was easy to get him to come in for a picture. he's been like a son to Rita and I still stay in touch with Ronnie. We talk occasionally.
Yeah.
But he was absolutely one of my favorites. But it was, I'm not trying to take credit for everything, but that was my idea.
Okay. Well, it was one of those things that it really was completely different from anything that anybody else had produced at that time. So I was just wondering how that all happened. John, you've had so many riders in your stable. I mean, here's a good picture of some of them. Of course, you got Glover, Burnworth, Ricky Johnson, Donnie Hansen, Chuck Sun, Ken Howerton, and of course, Marty Smith, and so many more. Can you really recall any ad that you ran that it just exploded when you ran it and gave you, it had much more of an impact than any other advertising you'd ever done?
Well, I can tell you what I don't know what kind of an impact it had, but one of my favorite ones, Ricky Johnson left us for Fox.
Yes.
And I got him, and they had an ad in it, and Ricky was nude.
Yeah.
And he had sort of one of those classic, I don't know what you call it, kind of a Roman statue looking.
The thinker pose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. And so we did one after he said, I think that their caption of their ad was thinking about it. So I had him do one after when he first came back with us, and he was, of course, completely decked out in the bad boy stuff, and then we just put thought about it. So I thought that was one of the best ones we ever did. And then I think that one of the classic ads we did was the one with Hannah and Mikola. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but it's
well, not only have I seen it, John, I do believe that I have a slide of it right here. Here we go.
Yeah, that's it. That was my favorite ad of all time, I think. Heike was great to work with, as was Bob. Those two guys, Heike did a lot for us in Europe, and Hannah probably, I don't know, he sold a lot of stuff for us. Bob was really good. We had a good relationship. Even to this day, we have a good one. He was a good guy.
I remember you telling me a story one time about you were overstocked with some blue pants with yellow stripes on them.
Yeah, we bought back in the day, we bought a bunch. We thought the Husky riders, would really like those. We ended up with about 400 pair of those damn things, and Bob was always good. He checked in all the time, and he called me up one night, and I said, "Hey, I got an idea. It's going to be a little different, but." And Bob was game for it, so we made him that outfit with the blue and yellow pants.
Yeah.
And we made a jersey for him that looked like a Superman jersey, except we put an H in it instead of the S. And Bob, it was at the New Orleans race, and Bob won that night. I'll never forget this. It's my favorite sales story. By Wednesday, the race was on Saturday or Sunday. By Wednesday, we had sold every single pair of those blue and yellow pants that I thought I was going to have till I died. and we had to order more. So that was the impact that those riders had in those days.
We're going to take a short break, John. When we come back, we'll talk about another rider who had, I'm sure, a big impact on JT, Marty Smith. We'll be right back with more John Gregory.
All right.
Vinco, who already has a full line of vintage parts, now has air shocks that are an exact duplicate of the original air shocks so popular in the late 70s. So whether you're looking to build a full racer or museum showpiece, these shocks will give you that incredible 70s look and improve your bike's performance. These new air shocks are fully rebuildable with Vinco rebuild kits, and all shocks are hand assembled in the USA with all new components. Every component is brand new. Just like the originals, our air shocks are adjustable with 2 chambers, high and low pressure, giving you tremendous flexibility for settings of your bike suspension. The Vinco air shocks come fully assembled and ready for installation, Just add air or nitrogen. The kits include the manual and spacers. Visit Ventco.com to check out the air shocks and all that Ventco has to offer to help you get back on track and keep that ride going.
Ventco Specials 1973, 1974 Honda CR250 pistons. These are 5 millimeters over. The kit comes complete with the wrist pin, the circlips, and the rings. That's Ventco. Keep the ride going. We're back with John Gregory. John, we were talking about different riders that you had in the JT stable. One of them who had a huge impact on the sport of motocross and also your gear as well was Marty Smith. And here's an incredible picture of Marty with that pink gear we were talking about a little bit earlier. And I'd like you to maybe share some memories of the years with Marty Smith at JT Racing.
Well, Marty was a local San Diego boy, obviously. Everybody knows that. And I don't know, we hit it off. I got along. We had a great relationship. And Rita, I live in Idaho right now, but Rita stayed in touch with him, and we stayed in touch through the years, right up until his death with Nancy. But God, there's so many, I can just remember a few of the things. I know that Marty would come in. He really liked to look good. He wanted all of his stuff. And I remember he'd try on something, and the first place he'd go, we had a big mirror in the bathroom, and that's where he would go in and check out and make sure it looked good first. But I was with him a little bit internationally, when he was riding 125 GPs and that kind of thing. But it was kind of, we socialized together. I don't have any really funny stories like I would with somebody like Tripes or some of the others. But Marty was he was an iconic individual as far as the sport is concerned, obviously.
He certainly was. You had the story about Bob Hanna, and I remember Rita telling me one time, she said, if I had 500 burlap bags in my warehouse, all I had to do was put a picture in a magazine of Marty Smith wearing a burlap bag, and I'd sell every one of those burlap bags.
Yep. Well, she was right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
John, let's look at some pictures. What's going on here?
Scott Wallenberg from, Racer X. I guess that's who it is.
Yes.
And he puts on a race in Boise every year. And I started supporting them when they first started. And every year I always pitch in and do some little something. And this year I had Garrett fly over for the event. So obviously that's a picture of Garrett with Brock. Brock has been good. He supports that event also pretty well. Brock usually rides, but that was this year's race in Boise.
Okay. What about this one, John? Is this I'm sorry, continue.
No, nothing. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you about this bike here, John. Was this one of your personal bikes?
No, I had one of the guys I went to high school with back in New Mexico rode dirt bikes, and this was a 1970 Rickman Matisse with a 650 Westlake conversion. It had never been started. He called me up and asked if I'd be interested in buying it, and I was, but I had that. It's never been started. I had that in my office for years, but I didn't collect motorcycles. I never got into that. I just ended up with a couple, like the one that is pictured here, and then the one that Steve McQueen had.
You know what? Being you brought up the McQueen bike, are you talking about the Yamaha, John?
Yes.
All right. Here it is right here. And I do remember seeing this bike at the Mecum motorcycle auction. I think it was 2018.
Yeah, that's about right.
So I saw your name associated with the bike, but I wasn't clear how the bike got there or whether you owned it or you knew Steve, but tell me a little bit more about that. How did you get involved with that, bringing that bike there to the auction?
Well, Rita and I bought some property from a guy that owned this motorcycle along with his gear. And he moved back to Missouri or someplace, and he had a museum, I think it was, I don't know, somewhere in Nevada, and he didn't want to take all this stuff with him, and he asked if I'd be interested in it, and I said no, not really. I don't collect stuff, and he said, well, would you give me $10,000 for it? I thought he was going to ask a fortune, and so, well, yeah, I'll give you 10,000 for it. So I bought the bike and all of Steve's gear for 10 grand. So when we sold the bike, the gear went with it. Now, I can't remember the guy that bought it, but that's the story.
There was some documentation that went with that bike too. So it was an authentic bike.
It was real. I had all of the authenticity work that was done. It sold it. Previously had gone through a big auction in Las Vegas.
Yeah, it was at Mecum, wasn't it?
Correct. And the reason it was at Mecum was because of Gavin Tripp. Gavin and I were, in later years, we became really close. And Gavin, I told him about having that bike, and he said, well, what are you going to do with it? And I said, it just kind of sits here. I'd really like to get rid of it. And then he suggested that I bring it to the auction, and I sold both that Rickman and McQueen's bike at the Mecum auction.
I do remember the McQueen bike going that day, the YZ going. I can't really recall the Rickman, but yeah, it was just a question I had. Now, John, JT eventually got into BMX gear as well as paintball. How'd the BMX gear come into play? Do you remember some of your riders who you sponsored through the bicycle motocross years?
Sure. Well, BMX, the kids were wearing our gloves. You know, their heroes were the motocross guys. You know, you name it, and that's how that all got started, and that's how we got involved. But we had guys like, you know, Bob Harrow and let's see, Toby, and good God, I've forgotten. There's a whole bunch of them. It was just kind of a natural that they used basically the very same thing. They even used mouth guards, and some of them used our helmet, and the very first pants they had were motocross pants, and then we started making BMX gear. It was more appropriate and better for it, but that's how we got into that.
And the paintball thing, who discovered that there was a market for your product in the paintball world?
One day, Marty Tripes and we worked together forever. Marty was a great friend. One day, Marty came in, and I couldn't believe it. I was, what in the world happened to you? And he had these welt things all over him. And he said, I just had the most fun I've ever had in my life. And I said, well, what kind of fun was that? He told me about paintball, and he said, you got to come and play it with me. And so the next weekend I went with Marty and I played paintball, and one of the first things I noticed that those are back in the days that there were no rules or regulations on the speed of the paintball. You know, there were guys that were freezing their paintballs. You'd go up and all the cars would be running, and they used a little 12-gram thing. And God, there was no eye protection available. They were using sunglasses and safety goggles that you buy at Walmart, and ski goggles and motorcycle goggles. And people were being blinded left and right. And we had a goggle, and I thought, holy, that might be. So just for the fun of it, and because of Marty, after playing it, and I really enjoyed paintball. I played paintball also. And so that Tripes is the one that introduced us to paintball.
Tripes, huh? Very, very interesting. Now, John, after all those years in business with JT, you sold the company in 2000 after over 30 years.
Yep.
Who did you sell the company to, and what happened to it after that? Who owns it now? They're still making gear, but who owned it? Who did you sell it to, and did you have your hands in that at all after it was sold?
We sold it to a company called Brass Eagle. They were an offshoot of the Daisy air rifle. They were somehow connected there.
Okay.
And today, but we sold them the whole thing, motocross and everything. Obviously, they bought us because I got their Walmart account for paintball, and they called me the next day practically, and that's what started the negotiations for the sale of the company.
I see.
And right now, today, I don't even know who owns the brands. One of the friends that I've stayed in touch with over the years has been, his name is Alan Aziz. Have you heard of him?
That name does ring a bell. Yeah.
He ended up with the brand for motocross. Brass Eagle split off. They sold the motocross label to Alan and some of his group, whoever he put it up with, and then the paintball went off on its own, and I have no idea who owns it now. I don't get phone calls from them ever, so I haven't stayed in touch with them.
All right. I want to mention our sponsor, Motion Pro. Don't forget, it's 20% off across the board on everything from Motion Pro except custom cables. Use the code MP9135. That's MP9135 to get 20% off everything at Motion Pro. We have been speaking with John Gregory of JT fame, and we've talked about paintball and all sorts of gear and how he got into the market with all this clothing. But John, you've got another passion, flying. And I want to know more about what you do with small aircraft. Tell us about what planes you've owned, and let's talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think somebody has been a big influence on me as far as aviation is concerned was my uncle, who was my hero.
Yeah. But
Hannah has been a big influence on my flying. I've always liked Idaho, and Bob introduced me to mountain flying.
What is that?
Well, sometimes it can be very, very technical. We fly in these canyons up here in Idaho and in Utah, and they've been flying that's basically bush flying, I guess you'd call it. And it's the nearest thing to a dirt bike. And it requires maybe, I'm not going to say more expertise, but at least a good motorcycle rider makes a good pilot, I think. But Bob is the one that really got me into mountain flying. I flew a plane called a P-210 for 20 years because our R&D was in Sun Valley, Idaho. And I got tired of spending 16 hours a day flying from San Diego to Sun Valley. So I bought this plane that enabled and I could fly nonstop from San Diego to Sun Valley in about 5 hours. And then Bob introduced me to backcountry flying, and so that's what I've been doing ever since. I have about, 15 or 20,000 total hours in the air.
Okay. Perhaps this may not be the best segue in the world, but you seemed like you had a little time, not only in the air, but you had a little time in a tree one day.
Yeah. That'll be on my tombstone. I just got back from a high school reunion, and I hadn't seen some of these people in 65 years, and every one of them knew I didn't land in a tree. I crashed in a tree, if you just really want to get down to it. But that'll be with me. That'll be with me till my dying day.
Well, John, how did you wind up in the top of a tree? Were you in the plane and it just stayed? I mean, you're obviously trapped in the plane in a tree. How'd they get you down? Walk us through that. This is not every day I get to speak to a guy who's crashed a plane into a tree.
No, there's not too many of us. I really should be dead technically, because
How long were
anyway,
you up there, John?
about 4 or 5 hours, something like that. They teach you. They always teach you. You fly to the crash, and I was going in. I have a real house in McCall, Idaho, and I was going home one day, and it was a flight that I'd made 100 times or more between the ranch and McCall, and the engine quit.
Right.
I had gas, so it wasn't a gas problem. And all of a sudden, I was about 5 miles from the airport, and the engine quit. And so there I was. There wasn't any place to go but 80-foot tall pine trees and 20 feet apart. So I looked right quick. I knew wasn't high enough I could make it to the airport. I just resigned myself to doing what I had to do. And I didn't have time to get scared. It happened so quick. So I just set up a good glide ratio and was lucky enough to hit a tree just right. One of the struts broke off of the plane. By the way, I fly Super Cubs. That's the only kind of plane I fly in the backcountry. And there's a saying that says you can just barely get killed in a Super Cub. I've tried 3 or 4 times. That wasn't my first time, but I hit the tree and didn't dare move for a couple of minutes, and there's gas running all over me. Of course, the first thing you do is you shut down all the electronics, and then there's a thing in that goes off that when you crash, it goes off automatically. And then I couldn't get to my phone, so I couldn't call Lori, and so I was just kind of stuck. And after it was about dark, and so after a while, the phone flew out of my pocket, and I was somewhere in the plane, but I was afraid to move because I thought I was 80 feet up in the air, by the way. And I didn't dare move, thinking that would be enough, that the next thing it would be on the ground. But after a while, I kind of got moving around a little bit. So the plane was really stuck. They couldn't even get it out with a helicopter. They cut the tree down to get the plane.
How did they get you out of the plane, John? How did they get you out of the plane?
My neighbor in McCall, I'll never forget it. He's the brave one, because that plane could have dislodged from that tree and come down right on top of him. But he limbed that thing all the way to the top, and he brought a rope and a harness with him, and he rappelled me down from the plane. Knocked on the window and said, "Hey, John." And it was a guy by the name of Randy Ackerman. He's well known in our neighborhood well, he cuts down big trees all the time. But Randy got me out of the plane. It was after dark. When they started looking for me, everybody was looking on the ground. They weren't looking in a tree. So I was afraid to turn it on because of the gas on me.
Right.
And then finally I got my phone working, and then there was a local kind of a rescue outfit there in McCall, and somebody looked up and saw where I was, and they got me out.
Was the plane repairable?
It was in the tree, but not when they cut it down.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Hey, you mentioned John Tomac before, and I understand you guys might be giving Eli some flying lessons. Any truth to that rumor?
Well, not us personally, but I know that Bob and I have talked about it, and I've worked with Johnny on a couple of other projects, and they live in Cortez, Colorado.
Yeah.
I also fly a lot in Utah. There's over 250 backcountry airstrips in Utah, some of the best backcountry flying in the country. And they live right in the middle of it, or right on the edge of it. And Johnny and Eli are both avid hunters, and I've landed at a lot of those places there. And I said, you guys, especially, I was pushing Eli. I said, you need to learn how to fly and maybe get into some of these remote areas. And he started out, it was 3 or 4 years ago. He kind of he kind of touched on it a little bit, but since he got hurt, I got a text from him the other day, and he said that he was taking flying lessons again. So I hope Eli keeps it up, because he'd be one of the best. I know
Yeah.
he would.
How about Bob Hanna? Is Bob Hanna a good pilot?
I taught Bob everything he knows. Bob is probably the best pilot I've ever been around.
Really?
Bob is incredible. I don't care. It's funny. He's had a, we both landed. I don't know, but do you know that Bob landed a plane in the tree also? Did you hear that story?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he knows what it's like to land in trees also. But that was way back when he first started flying a long, long time ago. I think he was in Georgia or someplace. He's really lucky to be alive.
Wasn't that a stunt plane?
No, he was in I think it was a P-210, one like I flew for years.
Oh, okay.
He was with a guy that was real popular with the riders. I forgot the guy's name, but anyway. So Bob knows what it's like, and then he had an occasion the beginning of this year, I think is New Year's Day. Maybe you've already heard about it. He had some bad luck, and he was on a ridge and was taking off, and the snowpack gave it away from him. And the next thing he knows, he's sliding down a mountain, standing on the wing with the plane upside down. So have to talk to him to get that story. But
All right.
Bob's he's besides my wife, I don't know of anybody I'd trust more with my life than those two.
I want to thank our sponsor, ReplicaMotorcycleParts.com, Paul Parkinson Sr. He'll make your part, no matter what it is. If you have it and it's broken, you can send it to Paul Parkinson Sr., ReplicaMotorcycleParts.com. He will replicate it. And in the coming year, he's been doing air boxes and all sorts of parts for your Hondas, Yamahas, Suzukis. But in the this coming year, he tells me that he's going to be making things from gears all the way to cylinders. My guest this afternoon is John Gregory. We talked about the JT line. We talked about flying. How's your fishing game going, John? Catching any fish?
I love to fish, and it's kind of like moving to the beach, and because you love the ocean. But
yeah,
I used to be an avid fly fisherman, and still can take it up. I'm at my age though. Sometimes I have trouble. Best times to fish seems like are late in the evening, and I can't even see the hole well enough to tie a fly now hardly. But I did a lot of fly fishing back in my day, and the fishing right now I live within probably one of the better trout streams and maybe in the country. It's I live near a little town called Chalice, Idaho. I live on a backcountry ranch. It's 60 miles from the nearest paved road. The only way in here is to fly. I live 20 miles as the crow flies from Chalice, and I live right on the eastern edge of the Frank Church wilderness of no return fame. You've ever heard of the Middle Fork of the Salmon River? That's a famous rafting area they have here.
No, I don't know much about that. But when we were talking the other day, you said you have a debt of gratitude to Elon Musk.
Oh yeah, I'd vote for that sucker in a heartbeat. I just got one of his new. Well, I guess it's an antenna that picks up his satellites, and it's enabled us to do what we're doing right now. Right now, I'm at this remote place in the middle of nowhere in Idaho, and I think the reception has been exceptional, if not
it has.
As good as you can get. But it's kind of changed. It's changed everything. I use my telephone back here now like I'm in town. I can call anybody anytime, anywhere, and the internet is terrific. And God, I've got YouTube. I just got a new TV. I don't even know how to use all the stuff that it does, but thanks to this uh, Elon Musk dude and his satellite system, it's changed lives. I think it's now you can I have unlimited internet reception here, so it's been a godsend for me.
Supercross and motocross, John. I mean, you're friends with the Tomac family. They're very, very successful at what they've done. Do you follow Supercross and motocross?
I followed it because of Eli, and you know, and then I maintained some relationships from, like I said, Garrett Wolsink is an old friend. I talk to him often. Remo Berlizzi, by the way, is the founder of AXO. He's going to come to the ranch next Friday, so I stay in touch, kind of like that. But I'm afraid I'm not as enthusiastic, obviously, about following the circuit as I used to. When Eli was racing, I never missed a race, but I got to admit that I've always enjoyed knowing somebody more than just, it's kind of like I don't really watch football or basketball. Same reason. I like some skin in the game, and Eli kind of provided that. Eli and Johnny kind of provided that for me.
Yeah.
To keep my interest peaked.
Well,
make a long
John,
story short, one show Eli quits, I don't know what I'll do. I may not even know who's doing it anymore.
Well, John, we've gone close to an hour, and is there anything that you'd like to discuss that I didn't bring up, or has anything triggered your memory, or some things that you might want to discuss on your own? I'd like to open the mic to you, give you a minute or so to talk about whatever that might be. It could be anything. It could be politics, whatever it might be.
Oh,
I said it could be. I didn't say do that. I'm just
we did. Yeah, we don't want to. I think everybody. Well, just to give you an idea, that mugshot of Trump, I've got plastered on my front door right now. I'll vote for him, even if he's in prison. I'll vote for him.
It seems that anybody who's behind him would, and we'll leave it at that.
That's the best way to do that.
The best way to do it, John. I want to thank you, John Gregory, for being my guest today. And thank you. And of course, congratulations, too. I know it's been a while, but you were inducted into the AMA Hall of Fame, you and your previous bride, Rita, for your years with JT.
Yeah, well, I think that one thing I want to stress right now is the part that Rita played in JT. People kind of got the wrong idea, I think, as far as the part that she played, and she's the same way, but she was half of the company. You know, she wrote all the copy. She named a lot of the products. She was incredible. She was more than half of the company as far as I'm concerned.
Well, so, John, I have to confess that I did ask Rita to come on the show at one point, and some time went by, and then I asked her again, and she said, "No, you want to talk to John. You don't want to talk to me."
No. You've got to get her someday, because
I will.
She can tell you stories that I've forgotten a long time ago.
I will, John. Listen, I got to run a couple of commercials yet, and I want to thank you for being on the show. Don't disconnect from me just yet. Leave your computer or your phone. Leave it on for 5 or 10 minutes. This way I can download the show so I can have it for the future. But thank you, John Gregory, for being my guest today.
You're entirely welcome.
Thank you, sir. Enjoy the rest of your day, and maybe get some fishing in.
Well, we'll try.
Thank you, John.
Okay, Joe. Thank you.
Bye-bye. My guest tonight has been John Gregory. We're going to run a couple of commercials for you, and then we'll be back with a couple of announcements. Hey, it's Joe Abadi for Vintage Motocross Q&A. When you're replacing a cylinder or a gasket or doing a top end on your bike, many times it's very, very difficult to get to the nuts that are on the base. And you want to be sure that you torque those evenly whenever you change a top end. Motion Pro has come up with this great tool. It's the torque adapter, okay? You can put any size wrench in there and you can tighten it up. On the back is a 3/8 drive. You can put your torque wrench in there, get the wrench on the nut that's on the base of your cylinder, and make sure everything is torqued evenly. This is a great tool. I have one in the shop. We use it all the time. It comes with instructions as well. Go see your local dealer or get to motionpro.com. And don't forget, go over to Vintage Motocross Q&A to get a 20% discount on all Motion Pro tools. Q&A t-shirts and hoodies are still available. Follow the link in the show description. They're available in white and gray. Vintage Motocross Q&A sponsorship opportunities. You could be on the board with the big boys, Vinco, Motion Pro, Full Circle Racing, and everybody else that's been a sponsor of our show for over 3 years now. Get a hold of me. I'll send you a package. Racer X, the best motocross publication on your newsstand now. Be sure to subscribe to Racer X. We've got some events coming up in the near future. We've got George Ackerman's Moto Barn. That is coming up in Rutherford Glen, Virginia, October 28th. Scott Burnworth, he and his beautiful wife, Debbie, are putting on another event October 1st, the Carlsbad MX Reunion. They're going to have riders, fans, there's MX legends. I've seen Roger DeCoster, Ricky Johnson, Donnie Hansen. I've seen a lot of people there over the years. It is at Booze Brothers in San Diego, California. That is from 12 to 5 on October 1st. I want to thank Mike Chamberlain. Mike Chamberlain is a show supporter. This is not like being a sponsor. It is less expensive, and you get to show your support for Vintage Motocross Q&A. If you'd like to know more about being a supporter of Vintage Motocross Q&A, get a hold of me. I'll tell you how all that works. In the meantime, I want to thank John Gregory for sharing all the wonderful stories at JT. Rita Gregory, if you're watching this, please consider giving an interview to us. I'm sure you could fill in a lot of the things that happen there at JT. But for right now, this is Joe Abadi. I want to thank you for joining me tonight on Vintage Motocross Q&A. I believe next week, next Wednesday, you will hear an interview from 9-time off-road champion Scott Summer. That's next Wednesday on Vintage Motocross Q&A. Thank you for joining me, and you have a good night.